It's time to cook with Susan Beck. Well, I have made a hummus recipe recently and posted it on my YouTube channel, and today I'm going to try a variation of that. It is the perfect time of year, being fall, when everybody's got lots of squash, and we are going to make a squash hummus. We're going to make that today with our acorn squash. So I mentioned you needed a roasted acorn squash to make squash hummus. Well, how do you do that? Well, you're going to cut this acorn squash in half. But first, let me tell you, this really is optional. You can just stick this in the oven, whole, like it is, and bake it like a baked potato. So if you're like, ooh, I'm a little nervous about this cutting task, just go ahead and bake it that way. If I look at my squash, I notice that there's this big end where it was attached to the vine, and then this end's a little bit harder too. So when I cut it in half, I'm going to cut to where I avoid that a little bit. So I'm just going to go slightly off center. It's okay if my halves aren't exactly the same size. Even when we eat these filled for supper, I just give my husband the side that's just a little bit bigger and I eat the other one. Now, small is good for this recipe because we only need a half a cup of the insides. Once I get it part way, do you notice I just kind of snapped it apart? Next step, I need to take out all of the seeds and any of the little stringy, goopy stuff, kind of like you would do when you're carving a pumpkin for Halloween. Now, these can be filled in many ways. Today, we're going to put it in a food processor and mash it all up and puree it for our hummus. But my favorite way to eat these is just to put a little bit of butter inside and some brown sugar. Look how beautifully that squash is roasted. Oh, I love when it gets a little caramelized like that. We're going to let that cool. Well, now that our squash is nice and cool and easy to handle, we are going to scoop out about a half a cup. Basically, that's going to come down to using all of this acorn squash. This was not a gigantic one, and it's probably going to take all of it. And if it doesn't come out perfect, I would probably just use it all anyway, or just enjoy a little acorn squash on the side. All right, there we go. That's almost perfect with one acorn squash. That squash is going to go right into our food processor that has our nice sharp blade already down in the bottom. And oh, it pops out so nice and easy. But if not, I love this adjustable measuring cup because I can just swipe across the top and get all of those stickier ingredients. All right, you might think this is an odd recipe being that I'm using squash in my hummus, but if you think about it, we have red roasted pepper hummus that we buy at the store, we have roasted garlic, and today we're having a roasted squash hummus. The key ingredient, I guess, in our hummus is always, you can call it one of two things. We can call it chickpeas or garbanzo beans. All right, we are going to drain those, and then I'm going to take them over to the sink and give them a little rinse. All right, well, now that I rinsed them off with some water, I'm going to add them to my food processor as well. Now you might be thinking, what does a chickpea taste like? Well, it is a bean. For me, it's a much milder bean. I'm not usually a huge bean fan. In fact, when I first started eating hummus, I had no idea that there were beans in there. But these are just a really, really mild bean. And, give them a try. It's good to try new things. All right, everything we're going to use today goes into the food processor to be blended. So we're going to put in 2 tablespoons, ooh, that shot over there, 2 tablespoons of our lemon juice. All right, next we'll add a little garlic. Let's get the peels off of that. I don't have to chop that up. I'll let the blade do that. All right, our next ingredient is also something that might be a little different that you might not be familiar with, which is tahini. This is just ground sesame seeds. It's just got a nutty taste to it. I really, really like it. I just think it's fantastic. So we're going to put 2 tablespoons of this into our food processor. There's 1 tablespoon and a second. We're going to add some dried spices. We want about 1/8 of a teaspoon of black pepper. We want 1/4 teaspoon of salt. We want about 1/8 of a teaspoon or just a little shake of red pepper. And then some Smoked paprika is my favorite. We're gonna use a half a teaspoon of that. But if you just have the regular, that's just fine. I don't know, just things that are smoky and things that have been heated, just have a little extra flavor. We're gonna mix this all together, and then we can add some parsley to garnish it. Run our spatula around there to get everything down in. Now here's a little trick. This is not very creamy and fluffy and not really the texture that I want for my hummus. So I'm going to add an ice cube, and we'll just keep adding ice cubes until we get the texture that we want. That's still pretty thick, so I think I'm going to add a couple more ice cubes. Now that is a much nicer consistency. At this point, I would encourage you to give your squash hummus a taste and decide if it needs anything else. I can taste that little bit of lemon. The squash just gives it a really nice flavor. I'm a big fan of some of the roasted red pepper and stuff, so I think I'm gonna add a little more red pepper to mine. And I don't know, I think maybe a little salt as I think about how that tastes. So I'm gonna add a little more of those two seasonings. Be sure to taste yours and decide what you would like to add. I'm just gonna add a little parsley to the top of that and make it look pretty. That's always awesome if you're going to use it for a party where you're going to take an appetizer. This is a great addition to your lunch. I love it with fresh veggies. The squash in that is just fantastic. I mean, it's not overpowering. I can still really taste the garlic, so if you like a roasted garlic hummus, you're gonna love this as well. If you don't like garlic, just leave the garlic out. But this is just a nice, healthy snack and a great appetizer. And I hope you'll give it a try. Something new, acorn squash hummus.